used to be with it, but then they changed what it was. Now what I'm with isn't it, and what's it seems weird and scary to me. It'll happen to you.
Despite me, losing any interest with Star Wars and the crowd-produced modernity, it is always a pleasure to speak on something which is now the once great. Also, while I have no interest in modern Star Wars, I will still talk about Star Wars, the subject, because I just like it. I find it amusing. Although I do find it kind of baffling to see certain individuals, people, especially the mental midgets known as Disney fans and their corporate shills, seem to get a laugh out of demonizing and vilifying the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic. More importantly, they do everything they can to justify the evil of the Sith and the Empire, saying they want to focus on the perspective, but not show the Jedi Republic as almost a character. Well, yeah, it's almost a caricature crafted by someone for whom the term nuance is a foreign concept, or, like Movie Bob, would have trouble spelling it. Some, like myself, albeit jokingly, think that Order 66 was justified. Again, I'm usually joking when I say this, because, well, reasons I'll get into. But for the record, I don't like the Jedi. To be honest, I think they were rigid pricks who failed to adapt with the changing times to survive. Also, I just found them boring, allowing themselves to be forced into the machinations of politics and the devil, basically. They did a massive amount of wrong in their existence, specifically against the original Sith during the hyperspace and War and the Mandalorian people. However, those alive during the Clone Wars did not necessarily have it coming to them. And this is just assuming you are going off EU canon. If anything, Order 66 was the culmination of a series of mistakes, which came back to haunt the Jedi at a later date and bite them in the ass worse than any dog ever could. Think of it like, I don't know, how Putin once described the existence of the Ukraine, a series of mistakes. That or like another group I'll probably mention. For context, I will give you a brief history lesson. After the Jedi were reforged and reformed, reconstituted into the Jedi Order and still remained on Tython, and this was a period of isolation for them, and they were still remaining separated from the Republic. At one point, a man named Xandor became interested in studying. I have to emphasize this. He was interested in studying the dark side of the Force, or Bogan, as they knew it. Like, it was Bogan and another one, like the dark side of the Force was known to them as Bogan, both sides of the Force getting their name from two moons. And Xandor petitioned the Jedi Council to create an academy dedicated to merely studying it. Now, whether or not you believe this could have still been a problem, because down the line maybe studying it would have led to them deciding, yeah, maybe we should just be using it, and the light side or just the dark side. Obviously, the rigid council, as is the norm of their habit of not resolving a problem, told him resoundingly no. Whether or not a fuck no was the basic response was possible, as well as being told where to shove it. His curiosity, that's up in the air. However, Xandor opened his own academy regardless. Many flocked to this, and eventually the Jedi decided to eradicate it. Their own little crusade, you could call it, only with no justification other than dogma, allegedly. And I wish I could do a Michael Jackson voice. As well as lie about Xandor and his people to the Republic, who the Jedi claimed was a little more than a warlord. Xandor and his people, known as the Legion of Leto, would be eradicated, but the Jedi did have some text regarding the event kept in their archives. And some of the later generations of Jedi would regard the massacre as a scoff. Well, yeah, they would. Sorry, let me rephrase that. They would regard this event with just a scoff, like live in balance with the darkness. Preposterous. Yoda, I believe, was one such person. You can find his commentary on it in the Book of Sith. And no, this is not because he was a actual Sith. This was just comments he left in the text that Palpatine would later collect. Years later, a number of Jedi would rebel against the Jedi Order in what is known as the 100 Years of Darkness. These same Dark Jedi would consider themselves the spiritual successors of the Legion of Leto. Unlike with the Gogu Legion, or now I'm forgetting where I had with that, but unlike them, that Legion, these guys were just exiled. Like, when it concluded, the surviving renegades would be exiled instead of being put through a stately sanctioned murder. They would be placed in a space shuttle or pod and sent adrift beyond known space. Unfortunately, this would lead to them landing in Korriban, which was populated by the Sith pureblood alien race whose society they would begin integrating with. And honestly, I don't think the Jedi's idea of dealing with them was that bad, probably. I mean, I doubt they ever learned a lesson from either incident, but the best way I could say it is, it's kind of like a point I once heard about the Catholic Church and the Inquisition. Some people think the Inquisition would just torture and kill you. No, that's unaliving you wasn't their only option. One of them was kind of like a prison cell. It was more cushy than normal, and I guess their thinking was that some time out to think of what you've done might, like self-reflection, might make you reconsider what you were doing. If you were I don't know, like a priest who was committing sacrilege or thinking of it and becoming disillusioned with the church and Christianity. Also, they would have seen killing you as a failure in some respects. But so I think there's a part of me that wants to think that was where the Jedi were going with it in terms of what they thought they should do. Like, okay, well, we killed the Legion of Leto, and that didn't do much. Whether or not they thought what they did to the Legion of Leto was fucked up is debatable. And I press X to doubt there. So these Dark Jedi who arrived on Korriban, they would influence this society from the shadows. Like, many of these Sith would marry the local Sith. Actually, some of these Sith would perform alchemy on the beings of this world to see if it was possible for them to copulate with the Sith, which I believe in the Book of Sith, you have notes from one of the guys who did this who said, well, my friend will be happy then. He's been eyeing a specific priestess a little more than usual. And then generations later, a Sith by the name of Naga Sadow would manipulate events to gain a measure of power and attack the Republic. And I'm just glossing over much here, but this would result in a bad defeat. When Sadow returned to Korriban, he found himself not welcome and would ultimately retreat to, I believe, Yavin 4. The result of the failed attack on the Republic was a retaliation attack by the Republic and Jedi who invaded Sith space and conducted a siege on Korriban. This was a mistake, but I'll return to that later. The result was the surviving Sith people retreated to the world of Drum and Koss, where the survivors would dedicate the remainder of their lives to laying the foundation of a new empire for the purpose of enacting revenge against the evil Republicans. And I'm using that in massive quotes. That was basically what the Sith Emperor Vitiate promised. He promised them revenge. A great and mighty revenge. Gnashing of teeth. Against the Republic scum. Now, with all this in mind, you have some idea of how the Sith came to regard the Jedi as their enemies. Just as the Jedi claim Sith deal in only absolutes, the Sith could say and retort that the Jedi deal exclusively in absolutes. Probably worse, because honestly, the Siege of Korriban, what most likely happened is they went in, didn't get the response from they wanted, and the Republic soldiers probably went door to door killing a lot of people. Any moderates might have died that day. Well, maybe. These are Sith, and they do practice the dark side, and the Sith are unironically space Satanists. As a result of this impression, the Jedi and Sith are essentially in a Christian-Islam state of relationship, constantly engaging in a holy war with one another. Yes, I'm aware it's likely not a one-for-one comparison, just roll with it. However, the question is, where does it end? The Sith retaliation eventually... Like, they retaliated with their counterattack generations later, which brought about the Galactic Cold War, and brought death to not only the Republic soldiers and Jedi, but also civilians who had no real connection to their grievance, besides a possible blood connection to their aggressors. Like, some of these people could be distantly related to the people who attacked Korriban, but these civilians would have had no involvement. Like, civilians probably don't even fully understand what the Jedi are like, because they also may or may not fully understand the Sith, because some texts on the Sith, the Jedi keep locked away. To those who claim this was technically the Jedi's fault exclusively as they drew first blood, fairly speaking, I would argue that while the Jedi are not exactly clean-handed in the overall, the Sith are no more innocent. They were a culture that was not exactly the most peace-loving of fellows, even before the Dark Jedi brought them further down the path of being involved with the dark side, which is essentially a cancerous drug which can briefly grant a power boost from, but after that, it's kind of like doing drugs for creativity. It's eventually going to do not so much. They were perpetuating the problem. In some ways, it can be comparable to the Crusades and 9/11, in that the Sith were mainly retaliating from an affront which had been committed centuries before, or any of them were born, just as some terrorists and the Taliban would use the Crusades to justify their bombing and killing of civilians. The only Sith remnants of the Siege of Korriban was the Sith Emperor Vitiate, who is both proto-Palpatine and in some ways surpasses him in evil, in terms of accomplishments, I suppose. And he was more motivated by personal gain than any sense of retribution or perceived slight. Also, if you find me using 9/11 as a comparison to be a bit much, technically the Sith did level a long building that was a very tall building that was probably of a similar size to the World Trade Center, the Jedi Temple of Coruscant, because yeah, the one in EUCAN that you and I see in the films, that wasn't the original one. The Sith bombed that one. Actually, no, they didn't even bomb it. They placed detonating charges. That's what you see at the end of the Deceived trailer. But the Jedi were at least willing to move on and even admit their mistakes, the Siege of Korriban being the more prime example. Not only this, but they would be willing to at least try to reason with you. But the Sith, they continue to use the dark side and align themselves with it despite the self-destructive aspect it created with their culture. Those such as Darth Maul, who were wishing to curb or end this detrimental side of his people, were, if anything, a minority. Hell, Maul's not only an outlier to the name, Darth Vectivus would also be noteworthy, called a Sith who did no evil, described by Lumia as and this was another Sith who was centuries later during the time of Han Solo and Leia Organa's child. She would describe this particular Darth as a hard-headed businessman with a keenly balanced sense of profit and fairness, and when temptation whispered in his ear, he could ignore it as easily as he could ignore the importunings of equally destructive... Okay, I probably wrote some of this down wrong, but destructive soft-heartedness. However, I do have some non-casino-related reservations about trusting this information, as it comes from Lumia, a Emperor's Hand, who may have been simply using this to warp Jason Solo into eventually becoming Darth Caedus. Like, it's not exactly coming from a non-biased source. Regardless of whether she was speaking the truth, there is other information outside of Lumia. He is certainly an interesting figure, perhaps even arguing that not all Sith are devils made flesh, but much like Joan d'Arc, this exception is still validates the rule. The only difference is she validates the rule of not all women can do everything a man can do in a fight. Like Jude and Boudica do not are not proof that women all belong in war. If anything, they proved the rule because they were the exceptions. Other Sith did not. meet the mold of what a Sith should be, just as Elric and Melda Benet did not meet the exception of what an elfkin of his elfin kind should be. For examples of this, look at the Light Sith and Kelith Ur. This does not change what the Sith are to their core, be it in the pre-Disney films or the expanded universe, doing nothing to redeem their existence. If anything, I would argue that the Disney Star Wars and their apologist standing of Sith, to the point of articles claiming that Sith is a derogatory slur.
Of all the stupid, asinine, shark-jumping bullshit!
Which in hindsight has me questioning if I've had a stroke or, I don't know, the world has gotten even dumber than I thought, because Jesus Christ, the world has gotten so dumb now, even in entertainment, that it makes the idea of fairies being real seem more possible. But hey, make of that what you will. Is akin to someone saying that propaganda which glorifies and tries to rewrite history to make Satanists seem innocent and preferable, which, given Hollywood's secret proclivities, should not be too surprising in hindsight. A reverse of what Generation Tech would say George Lucas did with the prequels. To these people, I invoke Lee Grossman. Take a big step back and literally fuck your own face. Half the time, I think these idiots are just corporate whores or normies who want to see all fandoms go the way of the Khalids and the Thals. Only they didn't turn into Daleks. Always coming off as a smart-ass Don Ollie Murr when it came to... Oh, no, sorry. They come off as being about as smart as Don Oliver, the guy who basically fired Norm Macdonald for making jokes about O.J. Simpson, which, Don Oliver is a fucking idiot, to quote another late night show host. I would liken what became of the Jedi Order through Order 66 for a time, similar to the Knights Templar. Both were done in by an element of humanity with an axe to grind with them, and a vested interest in seeing them taken out. For the Jedi, it was Palpatine and the Sith. For the Knights Templar, it was Philip IV of France. The only difference being, Philip IV of France just owed them money, and he didn't want to pay them. Or he couldn't pay them, and he wanted their lands, because he was a greedy fuckhead. And I'm so glad that Jacques de Molay's curse caught up with him. Seriously, fuck that for all you asshole. Additionally, both suffered superstition and bad coincidences. And yeah, which is a little funny in hindsight to think of, considering I don't trust those. The Jedi were not exactly well known by the public in terms of their inner workings, in addition to being blamed for the Clone Wars, depending on the canon, by Palpatine. The Templars were similarly suspected of many things. From memory, they were somewhat secretive, and what occurred in their base often being subject to rumor and speculation. Like, the things they were accused of were batshit insane, stamping on the cross, worshipping a goat, which I think is Baphomet. And they were accused of a lot of insane things. And it's kind of like with the Freemasons. There's lots of rumors of what Freemasons actually do behind closed doors. So, yeah. When they were arrested, they would be tortured into confessing into rumored sins, the Templars, I mean. I also feel a little miffed with some YouTube channels such as Generation Tech for trying to humanize the Sith in what could be seen as a semi-deceitful way. Like, making the Jedi seem somewhat self-righteous. Their video one time stating that things like how one Sith is the child of a single parent, who they are referring to Bane, but failing to mention that the single parent who raised Bane, Hurst, was an abusive son of a bitch who not only hurt his son, but did so as his friends watched and laughed. This eventually culminated in his son Dessel unknowingly using the Force to kill him while he was asleep in a way that resembled a massive heart attack. This would not be only the time this happened. Before joining the Brotherhood of Darkness, the same thing would happen in the midst of a Sabbat game, ended in Scorched Earth, as everyone would become infected. Like, Vessel felt rage, but it was contained. Everyone around him felt it, and then next thing you know, a bar fight breaks out. And it was barely kept under control. It's scenarios like that kind of makes why the Jedi prefer taking younglings to live in seclusion of the temple. Contrary, like, it makes what they are doing make more sense. Because usually when you hear people talk about how the Jedi take kids from their parents, they don't always do that. Sometimes they do let you stay with your parent. It's just sometimes that taking you away is like, yeah, no, if we don't do this, then there's a chance that he will become very violent, very destructive, and very dangerous to everyone around him. Contrary to the idiots who cry about them being baby stealers and being mind controlling, like a certain ideology that came from Europe and then controlled Russia. Returning to the idea of the Sith being space Satanists, I would like to point out a contrast between them and the Jedi. While the Jedi are more Eastern-like in their attire and concept, they do retain some elements of a Western religion and Christian knights. While the Jedi do not fully follow the 7 virtues, they are fairly close. The Sith, in contrast, follow closely with the 7 deadly sins. The Sith pursue self-centered goals and little else. Revenge, or more based urges, such as they are the most kind of the based, who the Chaos God Korns, Tezinich, Nurgle, Malice, and Slanesh would have an easy time winning to their cause. That are transmutate them into greater and lesser daemons. Not only this, I might add, but also a norm where betrayal and usurpation is a standard among their culture. A norm they have not only accepted, but continue to perpetuate without ever trying to stop. Don't believe me? Look at the final moments of Darth Plagueis. Or Darth Vendikin. Even after Malgus ignited his lightsaber and told him, welcome home. Like, this was after they had attacked the Republic and they had taken a space station. Malgus's master, Darth Vendikin, had been wounded while they were battling Satil Shan's master, who had basically elected to stay behind and hold these 2 Sith off so she could escape onto a ship with a smuggler and a trooper. So he was badly wounded, and even though they saw them get away, Vendikin was pleased, and Malgus like, you failed, master, they escaped. And Vendikin's, this is only the beginning. And Malgus is just like, after 1,000 years, Korriban is ours again. And then he ignites the lightsaber of his, I think it's his own, because Malgus used a single lightsaber. Vendikin used a double one like Maul. But yeah, he ignites it and tells him, welcome home, before executing him. Vendikin did not look back to try and defend himself or even curse his apprentice as a traitor. No, he seemed more resigned to this fate. Not helped by the fact that the recent battle left him wounded and in pain, and he wasn't in much of a position to do anything because he was unarmed. He was no longer holding a lightsaber, so it's not like he could even defend himself. This is their way of doing things. Has been for a while, probably will remain so for a long-ass time. One could argue that the Jedi's more selfless focus or desire to not be as attached to life was its own downside, that their own dedication to the Force was their detriment. To that I would counter with the Apostles. They dedicated themselves to something much bigger than themselves and met miserable deaths. Yet they are remembered as much as those who killed them or more. What they did echoes through history to this day. Although if certain idiots have their way, probably they would erase their memory. But anyway. Are in a place in the memory of humanity they may not have never had it in their lives if they had taken a different path. Now, the Sith are remembered through history in their own way, but it is a memory of infamy. with only their fellow Sith and like-minded, their fellow Satanists having a positive adjacent perception of these particular Sith. And even then, those other Sith to one-up them every time. It's like having a bunch of evil people who want to one-up the guy in terms of evil. Like, the other thing I can compare it to is like Udi Hussein. I don't think he had a goal. Like, most evil people had a goal. Udi, I think, was just evil for the sake of being evil. Like, he wanted to be just like Saddam in terms of that evil. But, yeah. Hell, you could also compare them to Amalekites and the bloodline of Esau, depending on how you look at the stories. The Amalekites and Esau's other descendants, they forever had an argument, had a gripe against the descendants of Jacob, because Jacob, for lack of better terms, yeah, he did screw over his brother, and I'm not even going to mince words. I do believe he cheated his own brother in that way. But then again, Esau did trade his own inheritance for a pot of stew. So, make of that as you feel. Much like the Sith, there is room to argue that Esau and his progeny have an understandable grievance, but like them, their vengeance seems perpetual and pointless. Their transgressors are long dead, and this has about as much to be gained from it as the feud between the Innis and the Null Innis in DS9, the episode where everyone dies only to be reborn again and again and again. The same episode where Kai was died and then could never leave the planet. Yet they persist and deal in the power of evil. Perhaps one would make for a good tragic hero, always at war with their own nature, but they aren't. And we're not shown to be that before the canon of fan fiction that is the Disney canon. And that is me just assuming they are done piss poorly adjacent, like intentionally. The argument against the Jedi seems to be more for the purposes of making the Sith seem sanctified and the actual good guys, while the Jedi are portrayed as being evil. Evil. Going so far as to use very dishonest arguments for an example of this, look at how you will see people claim that the Jedi try to suppress what makes people human. That is a lie. The Jedi do not aspire to be emotionless, they aspire to maintain emotional control. Like a samurai. Having your emotions run wild is to have every decision to be made, or a decision which impacts yourself and others badly, is a recipe for disaster, as emotions can be manipulated easily. I ask for some patience as I say what comes next, as this will come back to the Jedi. This is why people such as Cicero were not in favor of democracy. It was little more than a mob rule, and the people could be easily swayed. Pull up the emotions and empathy, then you will do things that drain the ability of a nation or a person to be prepared for the worst of problems, or even take action which turn others against you, such as a man goading you into killing him, even if the man was evil and in the wrong. He now made you look unstable. He made you lose control, as the Joker did Superman in Injustice. Sith are not normally concerned with such consequences, as the norm for them is personal gain and little else. Jedi patience, they practice a form of patience as well as honor. Sith may have honor, but can also choose to have none, or treat such a notion such as moral, like the notion of morality, as an option. They will treat that as an option to be discarded at any time. They aren't morally challenged, or whatever gobbledygook the minimally exceptional want to use. Evil and selfishness is their bread and butter. Even if a person joined the Sith or turned to the dark side with good intentions, good intentions still ruins them and proves their undoing. Hell is paved with good intentions. Just look at Dooku and Jacen Solo. Their motivations may have some nobility to them, but how they wish to achieve those goals were generally ignoble. It's not much of a difference from Talion's fate and Shadow of Mordor in war. even if his first priority was revenge, he then shifted his focus onto making a bid to destroy Sauron, only to be betrayed and made a ring wraith. This is why Anakin was somewhat screwed from the beginning. He was not a bad guy. He was in a similar state of being a character that is comparable to Paul Greyrat, reformed jackass trying to be a decent husband and dad to be eventually left a quarter of the man he used to be. And James Potter, father of a stupid kid who liked to think that his dad was a do-gooder Boy Scout. He was someone not perfect and someone who could be manipulated in a time with emotions. Don't believe me, look how Mustafar ended. He could be a bully, but he wasn't an evil person. He could have good qualities but those same qualities were possible for him to be eventually put on the path of a villain. In a faraway galaxy, several things have been recycled and reused, or just ratified and proven true and true again. Jedi have been proven to be far more inherently evil beings with no exception, or not the Jedi, what am I saying? They're far from being inherently evil. The Sith, in their culture, is more closer to the inherent evil. In the G-canon, the Sith believe they could use both the light and the dark side of the Force, and it did not go well. That's why the Sith came to be. Or at least, that was one of the reasons George gave for how they came to be. It was either that or they had an empire, it fell, then the Republic and Jedi showed up, and they assumed that they were just waiting this whole time to take advantage. Hearing this somewhat explains what becomes of them, because to borrow from Manny in the show Constantine, in the episode Saint of Last Resorts Part 2, you cannot drink at the cup of the Lord and the cup of the devil. You cannot have part in the Lord's table and the table of the devil. Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? Using two powers which are opposites in nature does not seem like a smart idea. Or at least I would think it doesn't sound like a smart idea. It would be like taking two different drugs to do the opposite things to your body and being surprised that it leaves you mentally strained, or devoting your soul to Akatosh and Mehrunes Dagon and then not expecting to pick a side or be punished for playing them for a fool. There is an argument to be made that the Jedi were able to balance this out, but that was on Tython as well as in the pre-Disney EU, but they eventually collapsed and had to reforge themselves into what became the Jedi Order. You also have other comments George Lucas has had on the Sith origin of their dynamic. Even though the concept has some deviations or have perhaps changed over time, I can't say for sure. The core remains the same. Let me see. One time he would say the Sith Knights were started by a fallen Jedi Knight who was tempted by the dark side. But at another time, he would also say, everybody said, oh, well, there was a war between the Jedi and the Sith. Well, that never happened. That's just made up by fans or somebody. What happened is the Sith ruled in the universe for a while, for 2,000 years ago. Each Sith was an apprentice, but the problem was each Sith Lord got too powerful, and the Sith Lords would try to kill each other because they all wanted to be more powerful. So in the end, they killed each other off, and there wasn't anything left. So the idea of, when you have Sith Lord... So the idea is that when you have a Sith Lord and he has an apprentice, the apprentice is always trying to recruit somebody to join him because he's not strong enough usually so that he can kill his master, end of quote. Or that the Sith had an empire, it crumbled and emerged, and yes, that's the one I mentioned earlier. To the canon of Disney, I would say that all of this has been the result of writers preaching cultural Marxism and attempt to tear down the Jedi Order, who are seen as part of the old guard. The old establishment, despite the Jedi not wishing to partake in the establishment, being true in the films, be they used in relations to G-canon or expanded universe, to the original nature of the Jedi, but with a focus on the light side and the Force, Disney's canon is crafted by those who refuse to watch the original trilogy or prequels, thus creating a contradiction. For example, Darth Vader being surprised to learn that Luke is his son after Palpatine informed him. This second part being present in a Disney comic. But later on, we also have a comic where Boba Fett is sent to investigate the person who destroyed the Death Star. This is before The Empire Strikes Back. And Boba Fett finds out the name only and learns that, his name's Luke Skywalker. Is like, please leave. And then Vader's like, I have a son. He's still alive. So, shocker, Disney canon contradicting itself. Who could have seen that coming?
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Because of this, I do not believe the Jedi are in the wrong, despite their faults in the expanded universe, but were flawed beings attempting to do what was right, and are vilified by those who pretend to be moral and doing the right things. When honestly, they're the most amoral parasites out there. But then again, Hollywood is a den of Satanists, as far as I'm concerned, who frequently visit a certain island of a man who was batshit insane, let's put it that way. The Jedi were not bad people, just flawed, and they made choices that could end well or bad. They made choices that they had to live with the consequences of as a whole. To act as though they are evil or self-righteous, fools vilifying everything else that was not themselves, is beyond moronic and hypocritical. And when looking at some of the parties who perpetuate this anti-Jedi narrative, I find these people to be very moronic and just hypocritical. And just consider this and come to your own conclusions. This is just some thoughts I've had. I had to type it up, and if it sounds weird how I've been wording it and saying it, that's why. So bear all that in mind. But I don't think the Jedi are bad people. They've done some bad things. They've participated in some bad events. What they did to the Mandalorians during the Mandalorian excursion in the post-lore after the Clone Wars show came out was fucked up. But at the same time, I highly doubt they're the only ones who have done these things. Mandalorians have also done some messed up things. The Sith have definitely done some messed up things. And if you don't believe me, you are either dishonest or willfully ignorant. And I think I'll end it there. Have a nice day, and Yimo head. The Force shall free me.
I am extreme.